know what? Before updates, sorry, an opportunity for our co-chairs to say a welcoming word. Mike, do you have any opening remarks for everyone?
Nothing much. I think the issues we're talking about today are extremely important because we've got to benchmark where we are and what particular changes would bring us. So please, everybody, bear with us. Some of it's going to be pretty detailed.
Great, thank you. And let's see, I don't know if Kim Cobal's with us yet. Kim, are you here? And I'm not seeing you.
She might miss this one.
Okay. I see that we're also joined. Oh, look at that. Kim, what amazing timing. Kim, Mike just offered a few opening remarks. Would you like to say anything at the top of the meeting here?
Other than what Mike said, just welcome everybody. Sorry, I was late.
Yeah, no worries. I also see that we're joined by Deputy Secretary Suzanne Dorsey. Suzanne, anything that you wanted to mention at the top of the call?
On behalf of Secretary McElwain, welcome, and we appreciate your work today.
Great, thank you. So wanted to start with a few updates from MDE. MDE has been working hard to implement the Climate Solutions Now Act, which became state law about 9 months ago. Governor Moore joined us at the MDE headquarters on Monday to announce that Maryland will adopt the Advanced Clean Cars 2 rule this year to phase out the sale of gasoline-powered light-duty vehicles in Maryland by 2035. This is perhaps the most important regulation that states can adopt to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from the transportation sector. We're working hard to develop building energy performance standards to guide large buildings in the state to improve energy efficiency and improve and achieve net zero direct emissions by 2040. We intend to propose a BEPS regulation within the next few months. As you know, MDE is contracted with the University of Maryland for emissions and economic modeling for the development of the state's next GHG reduction plan. We're all happy to announce that we extended that contract to include an analysis of the state's spending on measures to reduce GHG emissions and co-pollutants, and the proportion of that spending that benefits disproportionately affected communities. We hope to be able to fold that analysis into the Climate Commission's final report this November. In a few months from now, MDE and MEA will collaboratively launch a Building Energy Transition Implementation Task Force to recommend new funding programs that will help homeowners and business owners reduce emissions from the building sector. We're still looking for people to join that task force, so please see the available seats and let us know if you're qualified and interested in any of them. And in a moment, someone on my team or I can share the membership list in the chat. MDE is leading the state's efforts to utilize funding from the Inflation Reduction Act for climate pollution reduction planning and implementation. The Baltimore, DC, and Philadelphia municipal statistical areas, which include counties in Maryland, will also receive funding through this program. We're happy to report that Maryland was the first state in the nation to submit our letter of intent to take advantage of these funds. And then finally, as we wrap up some updates from MDE, I wanted to ask Susan on my team. Susan, do you want to say something about the Climate Commission's efforts to do a climate teach-in later this month?
There we go. Thanks, Mark. Many of you may have received an email from the Commission about Earth Month approaching April 1st. So the Education, Communication, and Outreach Working Group of the Commission is promoting the Maryland Climate Teach-In on or around March 29th to help kick off Earth Month. So we would love to see any group or class beginning in pre-K all the way through college to take on this challenge and do something to talk about climate change in particular, not just Earth Day things. So part of what we said in our email was that this event is a powerful way for students and educators to encourage conversations, literacy, and learning opportunities focused on climate change, and anyone can easily participate. Models range from short 15-minute classes and group discussions to interactive learning to formal 3-hour all-school events. Resources are available for all levels of education, and we have built out our own page on our website, on the Commission website, to host all the resources that are there. It's an amazing amount of resources. So that's it, and thanks for the opportunity, Mark.
Yeah, thanks, Susan. Before we turn to the first full agenda item for the day, are there any questions that any of the members have for regarding any of the updates that MD provided or about that teach-in? All right, well, without further ado, I'd like to welcome back Energetics and VEIC. Oh, before I welcome them back, Sandy. Yeah, go ahead, Sandy.
Sorry, it took me a minute to find the button. Could you just quickly repeat what you said about the additional funding for University of Maryland and what they're going to be analyzing? I think I noted spending on GHG emissions reduction, but I want to make sure I capture it correctly.
Yeah, this is one of the requirements in the Climate Solutions Now Act. It requires that MDE develop this analysis and that it be included annually in the Commission annual report beginning this November 2023. The analysis is to account for the state's spending on measures to reduce GHG emissions and co-pollutants, and to determine the proportion of that spending that benefits disproportionately affected communities. So the news there is really, you know, that the news isn't what was published in the Climate Solutions Now Act. The news is that we've moved forward with a contract with the School of Public Policy at the University of Maryland to conduct that study.
Thanks.
Sure thing. All right, so welcoming back to the MWG, the teams from Energetics and VEIC for a report out on their policy recommendations, or their findings and policy recommendations for accelerating light-duty ZEV adoption in Maryland. Again, happy to say that MDE has done its part to accelerate light-duty ZEV adoption by announcing that we will be adopting the Advanced Clean Cars 2 rule. But very importantly, some of the work that they've done in this study is really looking at beyond just, you know, sales requirements. What do we need to do in the form of incentives, focusing on charging infrastructure, deployment, so on and so forth. So I'm really happy to have them back and that we were able to set aside significant time in today's agenda for this presentation and discussion. Before I turn it over to them, I just want to again acknowledge the generosity of the Nature Conservancy to have funded this study. So thank you, TNC. So Russ, do you want to kick it off?
Sure. Just let me know. Okay, it looks like that is sharing properly. Can you see my screen?
Yep, looks good.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, so yes, thank you again for the intro and the invite today to share the final results. So last month we were near final, so this gives us an opportunity to show off the final polished result. And like Mark had mentioned, you know, project funded by Nature Conservancy, very useful. And this is focused on accelerating light-duty zero-emission vehicle adoption. There's obviously a tie-in, I think, in support to the University of Maryland project. But just a quick overview, we went over this last time. It's really looking at programs and policies that can accelerate adoption of light-duty vehicles. So we're not looking at medium or heavy-duty vehicles, but anything light-duty, so personal use and fleet. So first, task was really just to look at projections barriers, issues with going after very high levels of CV adoption, and then test 2 and 3, really the meat of what Dylan on the phone will discuss from VIC's role. I'm going to go through this pretty quickly, not trying to blast through, and I'm just trying to leave enough time for the programs discussion that Dylan has. If I've gone too quickly, please stop me, ask a question. So after a couple different options of figuring out how to best estimate energy and emissions from vehicles, we really took the 2030 greenhouse gas reduction plan as a model, updated that for newly available data, and this allows us to calculate everything from sales and stock and greenhouse gas and electricity usage, and also charging station requirements. So 7 different scenarios are evaluated. It looks a little complicated. So 1A, 2, and 3 were in the greenhouse gas reduction plan. So this is just to give a sort of comparison and make sure the results were comparable. The second 1A should be a 1B. It was essentially updated with now known data on vehicle sales. The last data was in 2017. And then 4 and 5 were really the meat. We were modeling essentially Advanced Clean Cars 2, just 2 different versions of that. One was all battery vehicles, battery electric, and the other was 20% plug-in hybrids. Really just see how big the differences were there. So like I mentioned, we updated the sales, ZEV sales, and sort of between 2017 and 2022, some crazy things happened, COVID and other things, where the adoption was a little bit lower. So we updated with now known data and smoothed to meet the trend starting in 25. So the results were realistic. The differences essentially are very low when you're looking at the overall numbers of vehicles that we're talking about in the long term with Clean Cars 2. So these don't really impact the overall results. The one thing that we did do is the greenhouse gas reduction plan was using a static value of car versus truck over the entire period through 2050. So we looked at that, and we also looked at what EIA uses for the annual energy outlook as far as the split between car and truck. And we used EIA's numbers for the rest of this just because it was more realistic. And a truck is anything that fits into that truck class. So it's really sort of bigger crossover utility vehicles, sport utility, and pickups. So our updated model uses EIA's numbers there. And car and truck split, truck took over in 2017 as far as the annual sales. So the timing of the greenhouse gas reduction plan makes sense why it was using static numbers there.
And so just to be clear, Russ, so that if you look at the LDA is light duty auto, LDT is light duty truck. So cars in blue, quote unquote truck in purple, just so that's clear.
Yep, indeed. Yeah. And with most of the manufacturers getting out of, or the mass market cars, a lot of them getting out of selling cars, this makes sense for what we see on the roads. So just a quick showing of what the real impact of that was as far as just the reference case. It's noticeable, but it doesn't make a huge difference compared to the clean cars scenarios that are above it. So really just looking at annual sales, which is really the meat of this. So on the top is just sheer numbers of sales and then percentage on the bottom. So with Clean Cars 2 phases in at 100% in 2035. So the green plot is the Mitigation Working Group, which was the more aggressive version than the 2030 plan. So you see that, like mentioned earlier, really us adopting Clean Cars 2 is really the biggest single step that'll get us massive greenhouse gas reductions, because the Mitigation Working Group scenario was already pretty aggressive, and this eclipses that. Just looking at the greenhouse gas emissions of these, this is just tailpipes, so essentially vehicle level. So reducing gasoline usage, for moving to the plugins. On the left, it just shows the total amount of savings, but on the right-hand side, it really shows, you know, how Clean Cars 2 really does a big acceleration of greenhouse gas savings in these sort of earlier near or midterm years for really making a big and noticeable change. So we, yes, so we took all the vehicles. We're using the energy consumption. There's a really detailed tool that CARB has that breaks out energy usage by model, by car and truck and submodels, and then projects that out. So we were using their average efficiency for vehicles like kilowatt hours per mile. Use that to project what the total electricity requirement would be for charging these vehicles across the state. And then this all then tying in the generation and the usage to charge the vehicles with the avoided gasoline usage. This is the net greenhouse gas reduction, and the results kind of looked odd or weird for the savings over time, because there's not a huge difference between like what the avoided and this is. But really the plot on the left is using the 2030 plans projected electric generation emissions, and the massive changes on the power generation side is really what is key to making sure that the actual like full life cycle here emissions are met. So from that, with the vehicle population, then we were looking at how many charging stations would be needed. There are different models and methods that are used for estimating this. We looked at evaluating EVI Pro Lite, and we found that it's effective for very low penetrations of EVs, but when you get into higher, it just it has limits. We tried to sort of game the system, tricking it, but there was just too many errors. So it seems like just like sort of IEA evaluations are sort of worldwide, that this 10 to 15 vehicles to a charging port is a useful metric to use. So in the full report that you folks will have access to, we looked at what 10 and 15 would look like, just presenting 10 here, just as an example. So I mean, right now, I think the total ports is in the range of 4,000. So you see that by 2050, we're looking at 140,000 public ports. So this assumes that 69% of the population has access to home charging as their primary means of charging. So the charging here is for vehicles that do not have dedicated home charging. Both AC level 2, for the lower and slower on the left-hand side, and DC fast charge on the right-hand side. Fast charge is just 15% of what the total population of public chargers is. And just a summary, we had gone through this before, so I will go through this quickly. So really, all of that was looking at what the potential benefits are in charging station needs. The second part of this task was really look at the market to see if the industry is going to be able to support this. Is there going to be vehicle availability, the kinds and types and batteries and price and things like that. So overall, with many states in the US and worldwide going to a similar requirement, all the major manufacturers are developing ZEV plans, battery electric especially, and even some of the companies that were kind of lagging behind in the mass market, so Toyota and Honda, they have recently, within the past month or so, shifted their plans to really greatly accelerate EVs. So both mass market and premium brands have lots of EV models and across the whole lineup coming. On average, the 40 to 50% for mass market brands. This is, some didn't state for US, it was some stated were just sort of globally. The biggest thing here is the underlined bullet is that the manufacturers will have to target their availability of these vehicles where they're required to. So essentially in states that are required ACC2. So adopting that regulation is really key for us getting these vehicles shipped to Maryland. Battery price is always very high. There are a lot of different chemistries that are being evaluated and different approaches for vehicles. Ford announced earlier this week that they're going to be installing a less expensive battery in their standard range vehicles to bring the price down. It also gets around a lot of supply constraint issues. There's also some inherent charging and safety benefits in this too. But this is like using multiple chemistries as a way for them to manage the risk of supply chain until their long-term mines and deals are in place. Factors that get slow, there's a lot here. So, I mean, supply chain, battery availability, public charging infrastructure was mentioned by many as being an issue, but that's what we're talking about here. This is one of the big things. So really, purchase price of the vehicles is one of the biggest issues. And right now, these vehicles are very expensive. Projections for actual sticker price, purchase price, projections are shown on the right-hand side. The red lines are BEV 300, which is sort of like a sort of more normal kind of battery range. So in general, the projections are between, say, 2027, 2029, depending upon the vehicle range and type, of having price parity, or at least possible price parity. Whether the manufacturers shift these savings onto the consumers, we'll have to see how that works and how they price the vehicles with the tax credits being in play. But overall, the takeaway is very positive that the industry is moving towards that. It's really driven by battery prices coming down from all these various approaches that they're doing, changing battery chemistry, different completely new battery chemistries. This is from MCCC. CARB's review of this was a little less optimistic and had more detail as far as like as you get into the, more option vehicles, so cold weather, all-wheel drive, towing, things like that, push the purchase price a lot higher. So the takeaway from this is really that prices are coming down, but it's likely that in the market, incentives will be needed for many years to get these vehicles down to like cost parity, where just like normal Marylanders can purchase the vehicles. And then that was the end of my section. So
that's a good segue. We can pause any time for questions, but that's a good segue to talking about vehicle purchase incentives. Russ, I think I kind of swapped these two slides. Can you go forward one?
Yes.
Come back. So good afternoon, everybody. I'm Dylan Voorhees with VEIC. And I want to spend some time talking about recommendations. There's two sections of recommendations here. These are the first 5. I'll come back to some recommendations related to charging stations further into the presentation. I'm going to spend some more time on some of these than others. And I want to start by talking about vehicle purchase incentives, following what Russ has flagged as important, and we and others would identify vehicle purchase incentives as the number 2 biggest strategy and policy that the state could adopt after advanced clean cars. So I'm gonna go through these recommendations and some of our analysis, and I won't spend time on all the slides, but you'll be able to see some of the information there, including what's available in other states. Mark, I'm happy to stop. I see Sandy's got a hand up, so you can interrupt me, or anyone can as we go through, or we can do. It's a bit of a. There's quite a few more slides. So we don't need to get all the way to the end.
I know there's a lot of the content, so it could be useful unless we blow the budget on the time for this to have the members be able to ask questions throughout. So Sandy, go ahead.
Yeah, I just kind of with an understanding of the 4 tasks that you had laid out. My understanding of task 1 is that you were trying to get an understanding of the current conditions, the drivers and barriers, as well as develop projections. And then reading through the bigger, slide deck, it appeared as though there was stakeholder engagement. But I just want to make a comment that MDOT was not part of that stakeholder group, and neither was the ZVIC, which is the legislated group at the state level that has been charged with looking at policy and ways to improve adoption. So I would just, I just wanted to mention that had they been involved, they might have been able to point you to some additional resources in terms of what's going on at the national scale. And I also want to point you to the Department of Energy and the Alternative Fuels Data Center, which has state registration trends for all different types of vehicles beginning in 2016. So you can actually see the trends at each state level, including Maryland, in terms of the rate of growth of electric vehicle adoption. I just, as we look to these things, I just want to encourage that, I guess, more communication across to other entities when these types of things are occurring, besides just sharing fleet demographics. Not saying that your results are not great. I'm just saying that they could have had more information had we been part of the discussion at the beginning.
Yeah, the stakeholder engagement, as we worked through what that would look like for the project, and it ended up being these interactions that we've had with this group. There were 3 different presentations, sort of collect feedback, get questions and guidance, was the stakeholder feedback component of the project. It was not working. There was an effort to work with equity groups, but getting a lot of feedback and participation from them was really difficult, especially within the sort of timing of the project. So all the outreach that we did and engagement was things that I think most people on the call were part of, but definitely agree that a broader inclusion would be useful.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. And I mean, so specifically, just so folks are clear, I do think MDOT folks came to the stakeholder meetings that we held.
I've been at multiple presentations that Energetics has presented, but we were not familiar with what data sources at the time you were isolating down to. And had I known, I would have encouraged you to look at these other areas. So,
okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So, want to talk a little bit about the current state sales tax exemption, which is a key part of the vehicle purchase incentive policy framework in the state, and some recommendations for that. So if you go back one, Russ, I think we shared this slide before, so I won't belabor it, but just to reorient folks to the existing sales tax exemption, has some really good features, and it also has some challenges to it, including the fact that used vehicles don't qualify and no pickup trucks qualify, which are starting to be available in the electric market. The other big challenge with this program is that it is so funding constrained that the incentive is only available for a very short period of time before funds are exhausted, and that results in a start-stop availability that has a very diminished impact on the market. And so we did some analysis of what a budget might look like under different scenarios to provide an annually sustained incentive. So something that was available as a general matter on a year-round basis to allow both those selling cars and those buying cars to make decisions based on that policy, which is meant to drive down that cost and influence planning decisions. So if you skip forward to now, Russ, I think, Yeah, so we looked at 4 scenarios. One's just the current budget, which is not, which is just constrained by budget. It's independent of sales. We looked at and these are numbered, numbered well. We looked at a sustained budget, which would provide sufficient funding to provide the sales tax exemption on an annual basis with a simple, using current program structure, with sort of a simple increase in electric vehicles based on what the increase has been over the last couple of years. Then we modeled one of the ACC2 cases. Specifically, it was the one that Russ mentioned, which would be a compliance to a mix of all electric and plug-in electric vehicles. And then we modeled a third, would be ACC2, with also allowing used vehicles to qualify. And we made some simple assumptions here. This one, in this case, 15% of new vehicle sales, and adding eligibility for trucks. There's some details there, and you can spend a little bit more time with that. But this is an illustration of what kind of budget parameters. And if you go to the next slide, see that these are some very, very substantial budget implications over the next few years. And I'll point out that, as we, I think, mentioned in our previous presentation, the federal tax incentive is expected to be in a period of substantial change over the next several years. Currently, many electric vehicles do not qualify for the federal tax credit. We hope that will change. It's designed to influence manufacturer behavior, and there are some indications that it will. But currently, the lift of vehicle markets is falling more on the states in the next few years. Out in years past this, it's possible that those federal tax incentives will be available for most vehicles, and the state can begin to back off or sort of scale back its own incentives in favor of maybe continuing to emphasize equity incentives, which I'll talk about, and continuing to invest in charging stations, which is going to be the other sort of large investment. So if you go forward, Russ. So there's a couple of slides in here just looking outside of Maryland to some examples of what some other states are doing. This is an example of sort of adding incentives or eligibility for pickup trucks. But I don't want to spend a lot of time on those. So going to the next slide, thinking about equity is important and part of the task here. And as mentioned before, adding used vehicle eligibility is a really important part of ensuring that lower income households can participate in the vehicle technology transformation. It's not a complicated policy change, and it probably doesn't have big near-term fiscal impacts on the program, in particular, unfortunately, because the used vehicle market is still small for electric vehicles, and we hope that will change. We also recommend additional incentives on top of the sales tax exemption for low-income households. And many states have that, and it requires some additional features, including a mechanism to verify income, and there are different options for that, and ideally offering that incentive at the point of sale. If you go to I think the next slide, Russ has some illustrative numbers. So obviously a used vehicle is going to have a lower amount of sales tax, which means it has a lower incentive benefit. It's a lower incremental cost, but it's unlikely to alone motivate a lot of low-income households to participate in purchase of even used electric vehicles. And so an incentive in the range of $1,000 to $2,500 is going to be a closer match with that incremental upfront cost. For new vehicles, a higher incentive is more in alignment with that incremental cost. And some states are offering even more generous incentives than these. Looking ahead to some other comments in this presentation, charging availability is still going to be an important limit for many low-income households. So I think that's maybe one more, Russ. So again, just a couple of examples. I won't spend more time on them here, but there are plenty of examples of other low-income incentive programs from other states. So next slide, and there's another one. Another area of recommendation, and I think we talked about this last time, so we'll move quickly on it, but there are a wide variety of fleets in the state, some of which are good candidates for conversion to electric vehicles. And some of them, in fact, have very high mileage traveled. And one of the barriers that's faced for converting fleets, even smaller fleets, is the technical and informational and sort of decision-making analysis that helps fleet managers decide to begin to convert their fleet. And that includes economic considerations around purchase of vehicles, how much do they drive, but also charging solutions. How many charging stations are needed? How often do cars need to be in them? Are cars traveling in routes that allow them to be back at a charging station? What are the rate implications? Those kinds of technical analysis can really facilitate fleet conversion, even in addition to the existing incentives, but it's really a low-cost way of getting fleet managers to make economic choices in vehicle conversion. Next slide. Again, a number of states have incentives or technical support programs that are targeting fleets. And again, we're talking about light-duty fleets. Dealer engagement is also something we talked a little bit about last time, but it's really, I think, an important part of this whole package. And if I don't think I said at the beginning, there's no single piece of these policies and programs that will unlock the magnitude of market transformation that is called for in ACC2. It's essential that customers have the information, they have the financial means, they understand where they can charge. Dealers need to be able to sell these vehicles, and there are sort of constraints and limitations and things that the state can do to facilitate all of those. A couple of jurisdictions have very targeted dealer engagement programs that offer training support, marketing support, or targeted incentives to help motivate and educate dealers in sales of electric vehicles. You go forward one. Again, a couple of those states that have examples. People can interrupt me, but I've been going fast. I'll just sort of pause here. The last section is around charging. If there are questions on any of that, I'm happy to take a pause.
Yeah, go ahead, Kim.
Thanks for a great presentation. And I appreciate your point that, there's no single action that's going to tilt this whole thing. It's going to take a combination of it. I'll also be honest that I was stunned by the price tag on this. So let's just play the game. We're not going to find that kind of money in that time period. So do y'all have advice on where and how to cut back expenses but still yield as many emission reductions as possible?
Well, some of these, thank you. Some of these recommendations have much lower price tags than a vehicle incentive program that's designed to support tens of thousands and 100,000 vehicles a year. That is the piece here that has a big fiscal implication. Although, as I'll come to in a moment here, charging stations also has pretty significant fiscal implications. Things like dealer education programs have much lower costs, right? So orders of magnitude lower cost. Providing technical support to help fleet managers convert their vehicles, those are much lower costs, and they do play a significant role in market transformation. I think things like targeting incentives, it's not our sort of starting place of a recommendation, but there's an argument to be made that incentives should primarily target equity populations, and that households of more means will adopt electric vehicles as these regulations and other policies sort of take effect. But on the other hand, the emissions go down whatever the household's income is. And so if you have a household that has the means to make a purchase of an electric vehicle, it's in the state's greenhouse gas interest to have that happen. I think those numbers for 2026 are really big. Thankfully, we're not in 2026 yet, and I think there's a lot that needs to be monitored in the market, including what prices are for vehicles, how supply chains mature, whether these tax credits become more widely available sooner. Those are going to be important factors.
Thanks, Dylan. Thanks, Kim. Mike?
Yeah, this may somewhat follow up on that, and I was going to save it to the end, but let me try it now. One of the ways of looking at how much money we need is how much do we need to meet the goals in the Climate Solutions Now Act, right? And it's not a 60% for each sector of the economy, but let's assume we want to reach a 60% greenhouse gas reduction by 2031 for light duty vehicles. Let's just isolate that segment. And then let's start with the fact that we've adopted the Clean Cars Act, the California Cars 2, or however you want to call it. So we've now got a mandate for new sales to reach that number. One way to approach the analysis is how many more electric cars do we need than what California Cars would mandate in order to meet that 60% reduction? And isolating that margin, how many additional electric cars do we need? How much incentives would we have to increase the number of electric vehicles on the road to meet that 60% criteria, right? And I know it's difficult because, of course, if you do incentives for purchase of cars, most of the incentives will be used by people who are already buying because of California Cars. But to get that additional acceleration, what would we need, right? And that's the difficult number, but frankly, I think at the end of the day, what we need to know, if we were going to reach 60% solely by California Cars, because we've mandated it, there's less need for an incentive. If it's going to take those huge numbers to get to the 60% number, then we need to know that. Does that make some sense?
Yes. And I think you will, I think between the tools that that Energetics has produced and the modeling that the University of Maryland is doing, I think you will have those answers about that increment. But I do think, and you sort of hinted at this, it's difficult to imagine how you incentivize that increment. People come in and they buy a car, and that car isn't in compliance or in excess of compliance, really, of those regulations. And so it's difficult to design an incentive program that would only pay for that extra amount. What I think an alternative way of thinking about this is really trying to turn the wheel of market acceleration and increase familiarity with vehicles and increase the just market activity and allow those other mechanisms to begin to take place with less friction, which is a nice way of saying, you know, backlash and dealers and consumers and others who are upset about the direction that the state is going. And so you're really trying to smooth that transition and turn the crank to accelerate it. But hopefully it is not necessary to provide a dollar incentive for all of those vehicles, or as Kim just said, it starts to become you know, breaking the bank.
Just real quick follow-up, because I had wondered if there were things where we could sort of isolate types of vehicles or parts of the market that were not already receiving considerable incentives. I mean, we could, I don't know, incentivize vehicles that don't qualify for the federal incentive, or incentivize charging stations in places where people would otherwise not be buying the electric cars. Because it's that margin is the only way that I see to reduce the budget impacts of incentivizing the number of electric vehicles we need.
Well, I see there's another hand, Mark, but on the charging stations, I think that is a very good segue, because that is there is no mandate there. And you can mandate a lot of vehicle purchases. If there are not charging solutions and perceptions of charging solutions, you're going to have, you know, that's when folks go to Pennsylvania to like buy a car, right? That they can't buy in Maryland. That's sort of a little extreme, but I think an investment in charging infrastructure is a critical area, and it's big, but it's not hundreds of millions big.
Gotcha.
So we're joined today. One of our guest speakers is Kathy Magruder, Executive Director of the Maryland Clean Energy Center, who's on the agenda later, but wanted to pull her into the conversation because MCCC has been looking at this issue as well.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you, Dylan. I appreciate the study. Just a couple questions. Is it possible that you could model how the incentives might be offered in income tiers for impact? I think, you know, we understand the need to support underserved communities and adoption, but I'm wondering about that Oreo cookie middle, where there's the potential to really capture some greenhouse emission reductions, but how much does that market need to be moved is the question I'm looking for.
That's a great question. And I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but we are thinking about with what some next steps are for this analysis, and more detailed design or of how income-based purchase incentives could look is on the list of things that we think would be worth some follow-up.
That's great. And then the other thing I wanted to ask you was, what is the number that you think needs to be invested in charging infrastructure incentives, and is there a financing model that you are recommending or you suggest be deployed as well?
A financing model for charging stations or a financing model for vehicles?
For vehicles and charging infrastructure.
So we weren't really able to dive into financing solutions here. It is also, I think, something that is worth some additional follow-up, and I think that's something I've heard that you all were thinking about, and so I think that's definitely worth some more consideration on the vehicle side,
right?
At least, yep.
That's part of looking for the number of what you think. What is the investment that needs to happen that we need to find financing support for?
Okay, so go to the next slide, Russ, and this is one answer to that question. So this is the same data that Russ was referencing earlier. It's one specific case. I think this is ACC2 with 80% all electric, 20% plug-in hybrid. And we'll note that, and these two higher and lower quantities reflect that range that Russ said earlier, that ratio of 10 to 1 or 15 to 1. And so it's still a little bit of art as much as science to predict, sort of especially long term, what is the right number of charging stations. And this is a gloss on a lot of specific cases that are more detailed. But here it shows in the lines level 2 chargers and the bars DC fast chargers, again, kind of high scenario and low scenario. And then in the purple down for 2022 shows the current number of installations. So good news is, although those are very low, we are actually, Maryland is actually in the ballpark of sort of what would be called for and under those ratios. Those numbers then start to go up. And I would argue, particularly on level 2 chargers, it's really a strategic investment to invest on the high end of the numbers, and particularly in places that are highly visible, where the public is going and seeing charging stations. And this is getting a little bit to some of the conversation with Mike and others about how can we make some more targeted investments. Investing in level 2 charging, obviously DC fast charging is really important, and those numbers have to go up. But investing in level 2 charging is a powerful way of building confidence in a market that ultimately you're going to be mandating to purchase those vehicles. So let me go a little bit more into some of those numbers. Russ, next slide. So I won't read all of these, and you have these, but this is sort of some of the numbers that are on that chart. The current numbers of charging, the number of charging out in 2031. So we're talking about, and 2025, I guess, are the bold numbers, and 2031. Those are some of the big numbers really later on. So this is the point I was just making about prioritizing high visibility locations and some of the complementary investments that draw people's attention to charging stations. The charging station that nobody knows about doesn't have that effect in the same way. So those are not necessarily costly investments that increase the market impact of having a level 2 charging station in the ground. Next slide. A couple of general recommendations around public charging when we're noting here a couple of things. One, that there is, I think, an opportunity for continued progress on kind of unified information resources around electric vehicle charging incentives. The state does have a number of charging programs, and the utilities have their own programs, and those are likely to grow. At least some of the utilities are adding those, and so continuing to invest in that unified information and awareness about how the state is supporting electric vehicle charging infrastructure is again a worthwhile investment. The other comment here is that what we see in a number of incentive type programs is the more streamlined those incentives are, the more interest there's going to be, and the more participation. Doing competitive solicitations very much can work when you're putting in DC fast charging on, travel corridors. You've got big amounts of money. The state's making a heavy investment, doing a competitive solicitation. You'll get the big players to make bids on those. But for other participants, especially going for a lower value level 2 incentive, having it be a rebate as opposed to an application can make a really big difference to level of interest. And it does take effort. Quite a bit of effort sometimes for people to put together a charging station proposal. not knowing whether they really have a prospect for getting that funding is a barrier. Next slide. So the other piece that we looked at are disadvantaged communities, and thinking about how the state might set some targets for investments in charging stations in disadvantaged communities. For this, we used the definition from the Federal Justice 40 framework. And I didn't include, again, slides here about that, but that's well established. Right now, about 15% of Maryland lives in a census tract that meets the definition under Justice 40. We were interested to see not quite that, but not far off. Current charging stations, 12% for level 2 and 13% of DCFC are located in those areas. So we recommend that the state set some specific targets, at least following a proportionality over time. And so what that translates to is by 2025, 500-600 on the lower end, 800 or 900 on the higher end, level 2 stations. You can see the numbers for DCFC, that those would be targets for disadvantaged communities. And it's important to note that utilization of those charging stations may lag because vehicle uptake in those communities is also probably going to lag, even with really smart, well-funded investments. And that I would submit has to be okay, because you're really investing in a long-term transformation that you want those communities to ultimately participate in fully. And then next slide, a couple of slides, just looking at some mapping that we did. There's more in the report, looking at where charging stations are in relation to those Justice 40 defined disadvantaged communities. You can go through those, Russ. I think there are a couple of them from Western Maryland, from the peninsula. You can see there are some charging stations which are black in disadvantaged communities. There's also a bunch here that don't show up as well, but many more that are not in those communities. Next slide. So I know we're getting up against time here, but the last two sections, one on multifamily, and I talked about this a little bit, I think, previously. It's really critical to put an emphasis on supporting charging in multifamily buildings. 45% of Marylanders are renters. That's not the same thing as living in a multifamily building, but it's correlated, and certainly there's a large number of people living in multifamily buildings, which are more difficult to find charging stations, including because they may be renter occupied, but even those that are not renter occupied, condo associations and others. Maryland does have a right to charge law, which is again a small but no cost and useful policy, which says that associations like a condo association can't block occupants from installing charging stations, so that you have a right to be able to put a charging station in there. But there are many barriers for multifamily homes and in getting charging. Some of them are listed here, and so a recommendation is for EV charging station programs to really prioritize multifamily housing for outreach and financial incentives. So next slide.
Dylan,
yeah,
I know that you've got a couple more recommendations, I guess, because people have access to the slides, and we've only got maybe 3 minutes left for the time that we've slotted for this. I wonder if we can kind of pause on the additional recommendations and see if there's any specific questions or feedback that the MWG members have on this, and acknowledging this is a big topic, a big priority as we think about GHG reduction planning for the state. This is not the be all end all for today, is not the end of this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we got through a lot and most of it, really. So very happy to take a pause and spend your last few minutes with questions if there are some.
Great. So questions, comments from our MWG members? Well, then I cut you off unnecessarily early, Dylan.
No, we've had the fire hydrant open at people, so they're doused.
Yeah.
That's all right.
Well, so yeah. And is the deck that you sent over, is that the final report?
No, this is a cut down version of the final report. I think that the final will be available. I'd have to ask the TNC folks again how they plan to share this.
Okay, great. Well, I can make a promise to the MWG that when there's a final report, MDE can help distribute it to the members and interested parties here. Okay, well, and you know, the slides that everyone has access to today has a tiny bit more information that Dylan didn't get to. Otherwise, we could look forward to the final report, and then perhaps the next time we have a MWG steering committee meeting, we can discuss if there's additional deep dive into your recommendations that the MWG should have the opportunity to have later this year.
Sounds good. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thank you very much for this report out. Very useful. Okay, so turning topics a bit here from light duty ZEV adoption to state financing programs. Kathy, can I turn it back over to you actually to discuss? And you know, I'm not sure for everyone at the MWG that this will be their first introduction to MCC as a state green bank. I'm sure many people are familiar with that. But I did, you know, want to create this opportunity to make sure that you had the opportunity to express what MCEC does for the state, and also you know, some of the forward thinking you're doing on how Maryland can take advantage of some of the forthcoming federal funding opportunities.
Yes, thank you, Mark. And in the interest of time, I'm going to try to blow through the slides about what MCEC is and what does it do, because I do think many of you on the call are familiar with MCEC as a statewide green bank. But the slides I know are available, so if you'd like more information, it will be there. If we could go to the first slide in my deck, and I think Kim is managing the slides for me. Is that correct, Kim? Thank you so much. So the first thing that we want to understand, if you go to the next slide, what is MCEC? What is a green bank, and what does it do? Green banks use public funding out in private capital. Why is that important? Let me let you go. Could you go back to the previous slide? There we go. So to answer the question of what we are a quasi-governmental instrumentality of state. That means we were created by the Assembly with a very specific economic development mission related to advancing clean energy and climate mitigation and adaptation solutions. That's tied to creating jobs and reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Those are all part of our performance metrics. The center is has a very specific mission. The things that we do that are most important for this group to consider is that we focus on facilitating access to capital and operating financing programs using leveraged or direct investment. We specialize in procurement and technical support to facilitate project implementation. We support climate commercialization, and we offer education and outreach programs and training to stimulate markets and enable climate justice outcomes related to facilitating adoption of these solutions. I wanted you to understand what the green bank is, what it does, and why Maryland needs to have a green bank. So Kim, if you could just go to that slide, please. Let's go to the next slide. There we go. So the key point I want to leave you with today is that public funding alone will not be enough to achieve the goals of the State Climate Action Plan. I think we saw that in Dylan's report. We all are aware that there's just not enough public money to throw at the challenge. It's absolutely necessary that we leverage and layer private capital investment with public funding to expedite the impacts that we're looking to achieve in the time that we need to achieve them. MCCC will act as a coordinating hub for clean energy and climate change mitigation project development and financing. And the way that we do that is by providing that technical assistance, providing that access to capital. We are a neutral third-party convener. We are a not profit-motivated government entity. And our key effort here is to match the resources to the vision and the needs. And all of the work is designed to be aligned with helping implement the climate action plan that this group has developed. Let's go to the next slide. So again, this is all lined up with the climate goals, the Climate Commission recommendations. I don't need to school you on this. You all are very familiar with it. The Climate Solutions Now Act was a game changer and upped the ante. One of the benefits that came out of that for the Clean Energy Center was we were finally, after many years, given access to $15 million over a period of time to stand up and implement a climate catalytic capital, or C3 fund, which is what we're working on now. We want to align that state funding with private sector investment and with the EPA and a variety of other grant funding opportunities found in the investment in the Inflation Recovery Act and the BIL. So there's two pots of money. I'm not going to go into detail about that, but the $20 billion fund there, which is designed to create a national green bank. We are working with partner state green banks and the Coalition for Green Capital on a nationwide funding ask. We're also intending to go after the competitive $7 billion fund that is currently targeted for solar, community solar on residential rooftops and energy efficiency and battery storage technology deployment. We're hoping that they will expand the eligible measure in that funding stream. Let's go to the next slide. So the Climate Catalytic Capital Fund, we are creating 4 flexible tools that we can use to run money through our entity into communities and into the hands of project developers and implementers. A revolving loan fund, which will use the fund both as subsidy, buy down, and direct investment. An equity investment fund where the investments would be designed to earn a return that would go back into the fund like the revolving loan fund. A block grant program that would allow grants, and a capacity building fund that would allow for development of projects and planning at the community level. And all of this effort is specifically dedicated to assisting LMI and disadvantaged communities across the state. So we're looking at that very carefully in alignment with the federal funding requirements. What I want to share with you in the next slide is an approach to how we are going after different sources of funding for different strategy deployment. Across the top of the slide, you'll see a set of strategies that are directly aligned with measurable greenhouse gas reduction targets. In the energy box, we're looking at renewable energy generation, transmission and distribution, cost reduction, and resilience. In the built environment category, all of the parts of the puzzle that would be aligned with the BEPS reg deployment in 2025, not just the measures themselves, but technical assistance for helping building owners be prepared to make the improvement they're going to need to make, access to capital to make those improvements. The transportation bucket, as we've been talking about, how do we bring access to capital and resources to help speed that deployment? Then we have an ag and forestry category where we're looking for source reduction from ag operations. We're looking for carbon sequestration solutions alternative uses for fossil fuel in ag operation, like fertilizer, diesel vehicles and equipment, and propane displacement. In the waste category, we're looking for source reduction and reuse, specifically methane capture, combined heat and power from waste steam, energy from other sources, all that meet or exceed Maryland greenhouse gas emission regulations that MDE would enforce. And then we have a cross-cutting bucket where we're placing soft skills, workforce skills training, on-the-job experience, capacity building, and outreach and education for planning and assessment in communities. We were surprised to find we began our outreach efforts, just how many communities and even some of the more sophisticated ones in the state really aren't ready for project deployment and financing. They're still at the planning stage of implementation of solutions. If you look down the left side of the graph, you see that we've identified specific audiences where we would target investment to deploy solutions for those audiences. That would include consumer residential households, both individual and multifamily, small business and commercial operators, industrial and manufacturing, producers and distributors that are somewhat linked to the ag and forestry audience, municipal and institutional audience, and there are plenty of those, not-for-profit organizations, and entrepreneurs are bringing new and cutting-edge technology to the market that could make a big difference, transformative difference in the future. So let me go to the next slide really quick. I'm trying to do this, Mark, the 10 minutes or less. This is the, I think this is the piece of the puzzle that I really want to leave you all with today. As a green bank, we were created in 2008. We started operations in 2009. In the 12 years that we have been, or the 14 years that we've been in existence, with less than $12 million of federal and state money, we leveraged over $165 million of private capital to stand up energy and climate mitigation solutions across the state. And we've targeted consumer audiences with lending. We've targeted the commercial sector with MD PACE, and we work using our ability to issue tax-exempt bonds with institutional and municipal clients. What I want you to see on this slide is the funding that we've received since 2009. MCCC has never had until 2023 a sustainable source of operating capital to just keep the doors open and the lights on. In 2023, we were able to secure an appropriation of $1.2 million annually in legislation, and then the 2024 legislation, 2023 legislation that sets aside the leveraging fund of $15 million. But here's the message that I'm going to wrap up with. I want you to see the comparison to other state green banks that operate similar models. Neighbors nearby, including DC and Delaware, are working with a $7 million operating budget and an $8 million operating budget. Massachusetts Clean Energy Center, $22 million. The Connecticut Green Bank, $28 million. And NYSERDA, $90 million. Both Massachusetts Energy Center and NYSERDA also support tech transfer in the climate tech space. The green banks that were capitalized in tranches over time, the New York Green Bank received a $44 million initial tranche. And the last and my favorite one is the Montgomery County Green Bank, which started several years ago, was started with a $6 million settlement from the Pepco Exelon merger, and has also $17 million in investment capital from the Montgomery County fuel tax. I'm not advocating for a fuel tax, but I just think it's interesting that the county green bank has a $23 million to work with, and that is not at all what your state green bank has to work with. So I'm sorry for the duplication there, and Kim, I'll fix that. I'm going to stop there, and I want to take the opportunity to pull in Tom Peterson from the Center for Climate Strategies. MCCC has engaged Tom to help advise us and work with us and MDE on making sure that the investments that we are looking to build, the investment strategies we're looking to implement, line up with the implementation strategies in the greenhouse gas reduction plan for the state, and that we're able to measure the impact of how those investments achieve those outcomes as we build the strategies. So Tom, take it away.
Tom, looks like you're talking, but maybe
You're on
muted.
mute.
Kim, I just want to know if Kim was also going to be putting my slides up.
And while she's doing that, Mark, I think there were a couple questions in the chat. Francis Stewart asked, will there be any assistance or financing for pedestrian and or bike infrastructure? I think that we were looking at electric bikes as a possible solution. I'd have to get more information from you about specifically what you're thinking. The goal of MCEC is to identify the need and match the resource to the need. So if there's a funding opportunity that someone is interested in pursuing and using the vehicle of the Green Bank to get to it, then we want to talk to you about what you're thinking.
Well, thanks, Kathy and Mark, Kim and Mike for the invitation. And Kim, if you could go to the next slide. I'll try to keep this quick. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Center for Climate Strategies, we'll be 20 years old next year. We've done quite a bit of this work worldwide and in the United States, including Maryland, where we've engaged in, I think, 15 projects all the way since 2008. We're a neutral nonprofit organization. We're based in Washington, D.C., but our partners are in different places in this country, and we partner with folks in other countries as well. Go ahead. What I really want to focus on today is the planning and assessment and implementation dimensions of closing the emissions gap in Maryland. So conceptually, what we look at is like an alligator's jaw, where the upper jaw is the projection forward of greenhouse gas emissions in what we will refer to as business as usual, that is without secure additional commitments for implementation. And then goals that are the lower jaw. And the job that this alligator has is to close its jaws, specifically through different mitigation response actions. And I'm going to show you what's been done and what we are doing, not only to close that gap, but also to show how that can translate into the mobilization of investment through the Maryland Clean Energy Center and those kinds of financial mechanisms. Go ahead. So this is a graph that was originated from work that was independently donated to MDE, I think starting in 2017, and it was updated through, I think, 2021. I think the Nature Conservancy may have been the donor on this, but it's pretty straight up, where the purple line is a business as usual projection of greenhouse gas emissions, and then we have two target lines beneath that. Just note here that these projections go all the way to 2050. The modeling work that we are doing is going to go not only through 2031 to address the 60 by 31 attainment period, but every 5-year slot from there forward, all the way out to 2045 net zero attainment. But you can see we have a very, very big gap that has to be closed. Go ahead. And just to shine a light on how that breaks out, the red zone in the middle of this is the share of the transportation sector, which is about, well, it's the dominant share, although it's essentially matched by the combination of energy and buildings as well. But definitely transportation is the big kid on the block. I think the takeaway here is you'll see, based on that past work, that emissions go down through the early 2030s, but then they go back up again. So it really does broaden this gap in the out years. Go ahead. Look a little bit more closely at transportation. The last update for that work showed that of the transportation actions that are required to close that gap, and that was just for the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Act, about $14 billion in spending had been identified. Next slide. The bad news is that there's another 57 to 63 billion that has not, or at that time had not been identified. So realistically, we see an enormous gap that in this case is driven by a funding shortfall. And this gets back to Kathy's message that it's absolutely essential to get money behind these policies to assure their implementation. There is a procedure and a capacity required to do that. As she indicated, this is going to require not only the mobilization of public funding, but also very significant leveraging of private sector funds. This kind of graph is something that we could repeat for you, in just about any place in the world right now. It's very widely recognized that in the long term, the mobilization of private investment is going to be required in order to implement climate change goals and policies. Go ahead. So what do you do about it? In Maryland, we received a set of thoughts from the Climate Change Commission that I think were developed by September, so last year, that listed out recommendations on what potentially could be done to close this gap in the alligator's jaws. This list is still being refined, but it includes a range of specific measures in all sectors that have the potential for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So what we're doing is taking a very close look at these or actions like these to see their potential for closing those emission gaps, and then simultaneously addressing goals for social equity and then economic advancement at the same time. Go ahead. So this would be consistent with the general practice and the best practice for climate action planning for climate change mitigation that has been conducted widely by US states. It's also now mainstreamed as a part of the Paris Agreement with nationally determined contributions for national achievement of emissions reductions goals. And it's closing this gap through very specific line item policy measures in every single sector, with the requisite measurements behind them that demonstrate cause and effect between the expenditure of funds and then the achievement of benefits that include greenhouse gas emissions, but also economic savings and benefits and equity benefits. But this is pretty hardcore line item economic and financial analysis that we're modeling, and I'll explain how that's done in just a moment, but it will cover all of the different sectors comprehensively and a comprehensive set of measures within them, so that we'll have a measurement system in place to determine what could be accomplished above and beyond things that are already in place at a realistic level. Go ahead. So key steps here is to get the modeling set up, then to generate what we call baseline scenarios, and then actually look at these very specific measures and the contributions they can make individually and collectively at closing this gap. Go ahead. We're going to be using and are using two models. One is the LEAP model, the Low Emissions Analysis Platform. David Von Hippel, who's on the session with us today, will be leading that work along with Holly Lindquist of our group. David has been working with the development and implementation of LEAP now for many years. But this is a very, very widely used model, over 46,000 users worldwide in 190 countries. It's used in the United States and elsewhere at different scales, national and subnational. It's a very flexible model. It's also extremely transparent and flexible. You can look in the box and see the calculations, and then you can collaborate on updates around this. This is also a tool that is designed for training and installation. So when we use this tool in other countries, the typical format is to help install it for their use. And that's an opportunity that exists here in Maryland as well. Go ahead. We're going to be augmenting this with something called the CCS Greenhouse Strategy tool. This is actually a snapshot of the YouTube video that Holly has done on this tool. And this is similar in that it's a very highly specific approach to looking individually at different measures within sectors and then collectively at them, and then mapping that out to the changes in baselines that occur over time. And we're bringing these tools together to cover the bases for all of the different types of measures. This is also something that we use for teaching and training and installation. So this is available for capacity building as well. Go ahead. Some of the key metrics that are going to come out of this involve what we call social impacts and then financial impacts. So it will certainly be looking at greenhouse gas emissions reductions and then the changes in flow through in the sectors that result to achieve them, and looking very broadly from the perspective of government and society at what the costs and the benefit stacks look like for that. And that will be done at a very, very specific component level. We'll also be looking at the financial version of that as well, which is to pin down the production and operation cost for implementation. And this really does create a platform then to support the kind of work that the Maryland Clean Energy Center will do to translate all this into investment needs and blended finance opportunities for mobilizing investment. So this is all structured to be able to produce a very high level of financial detail, as well as addressing the larger scale social and economic issues. Go ahead. I think this is the last slide, but a really critical one because, as I mentioned, both of these models, but the process itself is highly transparent. So for each and every one of the measures that is evaluated, we will have a long description of the details and parameters that are involved in that, the very specific design of each of them, its goals, timing, who is going to be required to implement and who the beneficiaries are, the implementation mechanisms, including funding mechanisms, so that we have specification on how this actually will move forward with implementation. And the analysis approach, which will be a full disclosure of data sources, methods, and key assumptions. This also will address the issue of additionality by indicating how this new action compares to actions already in place or projected to be in place over the period of analysis. This is very critical because all of the analysis that's conducted is incremental to baseline. This is beyond baseline analysis, so we'll be pinning that down as we produce the estimates. Then those estimates will include a number of metrics that I just mentioned and will be designed to address not only cost, but feasibility issues. This will be, again, very open so that it's available for review and updating. The system that we use is something that can be used for iteration. If the first results aren't satisfactory in terms of performance, you can take it back to the drawing board, update it with alternative design scenarios, and take it from there. So we're looking forward to circling back with you at some point in the not too distant future to be able to show you what the update in the overall set of baselines by sector for Maryland look like, but also then looking very specifically within each of the sectors at the measures and how far they take you to reaching these goals and what sort of additional next steps will be involved. Be happy to answer any questions if you have any at this time. Thanks.
Thanks, Tom, and thanks, Kathy, as well for that overview. I think, you know, one takeaway in addition to the takeaways that Tom and Kathy asked for everyone to bring with them out of today's meeting is there are a lot of efforts to try to identify the pathways to help Maryland achieve its goals, and a lot of work to identify the greatest opportunities to fund the measures to achieve those GHG reduction goals. So we were happy to learn about MCEC's engagement with CCS and the project they're undertaking to try to evaluate the cost-effective measures to achieve significant GHG reductions for the state. There's a question in the chat: how does this relate to the work that the University of Maryland is doing for MDE? These are sort of similar projects in grand scale in terms of looking at different pathways that Maryland has to achieve its goals, with I think slightly different motivations in terms of the work that MCEC is doing is really targeted on trying to identify the areas for priority funding. And of course, the costs and identifying priority funding is, I think, certainly in scope for the work that MDE and the Center for Global Sustainability at UMD are doing as well. But just in case there's confusion at this point, we're working, of course, as we shared previously, with the University of Maryland for MDE's work at looking at pathways for economy-wide GHG reduction. That said, and we're just a few minutes over time, but thanks again for Tom and Kathy to join us today with their presentations. Wanted to turn it to let's see, Dr. Kennedy, if you're with us, to give a quick update from the UMD team on their efforts to work toward policy scenario design for our economy-wide model. Hi, Kathleen.
Hi. I don't know if Kim is supposed to be the one sharing slides, or I can share them myself. Just let me know what's best.
Whatever you prefer. If you're comfortable pulling up, and oh, never mind. There, Kim.
Thank you, Kim.
It's fast on the keyboard.
Okay, if you go on to the agenda slide. So today I want to give kind of an update from the previous meeting where we introduced this modeling effort. And again, as a reminder, everything I'm talking about here is for the June report that CGS is leading. So first, we're going to do a brief overview of the two primary modeled scenarios that we're looking at. First is current policies, which is everything that's on the books. And then our CSNA scenario, which is meeting the Climate Solutions Now Act goals for the state. And then we'll end with a look at our methodology for doing the impact assessment on both health and economic indicators. So for current policies, we're modeling both Maryland state policies and federal policies. So for the power sector, we have things like the RPS, RGGI, planned coal retirements, and of course the IRA incentives. For transport, we have the ACC2, IRA, IIJA, CAFE standards, and VMT reduction policies. For buildings and industry, we're looking at energy efficiency standards, the Empower program, building energy performance standards, and again, IRA. For non-CO2s, we have both the Federal AIM Act and the Maryland State HFC regulations, as well as the methane regulations. And sort of other extraneous things, we're looking at COVID impacts, a GHG constraint on the rest of the world, and a technology cost update within the model. And preliminary results do show that we're achieving greater reductions than the GGRA plan showed for the reference case. But I will note this is still preliminary, and we're continuing to refine that and working very closely with MDE as we do to make sure that we're having the correct assumptions about exactly how all of these policies will be implemented and what the state will be doing within the context of these things. Next. So I wanted to take a moment to dive a little bit deeper into how we represent the IRA within the model. So this is from previous work that we've done at CGS looking at the IRA at the national level. And that modeling work showed that it can achieve 39% GHG emissions reductions below 2005 for the US by the 2030 timeframe. And this is in line with modeling from other major groups like Energy Innovation, Rhodium, and Princeton's REPEAT project, which all showed between 39 and 42% emissions reductions. So there's a comparison chart over here on the side, specifically for our IRA scenario from CGS and the Rhodium Group scenario. Both the IRA, in both charts, the IRA is represented with sort of reddish-orange color, showing the range of reductions that it could reach. And so, of course, there are some differences in how we assume the IRA could be implemented and the impact that has on emissions. And we are able to test different sensitivities around how that implementation happens within our modeling and get a range of impact as part of that. Next slide. So next, looking at our CSNA scenario. So this is sort of a multi-step process where first we're doing an exploratory scenario where we have all of those current policies that I just mentioned, but we also implement an emissions constraint within the model to kind of help us see which sectors have room for further reductions. And then we'll build a core scenario from that targets those sectors and has a sort of best practices list of policies. And we can draw on our previous work from America's All In and the modeling that I just showed where relevant. Then we can generate alternative pathways with different sectoral or technological variation where possible. So if specific different sectors have a lot of room for additional reductions, we can target one versus the other and see how those compare. And finally, we can do sensitivity analysis on all of this around potential variations like the IRA, the Maryland adoption rate for different incentives, demand side sensitivities around things like vehicle miles traveled, and variations on different state level policies. So now looking at the impact assessment side, for health impacts, we're using the Co-Benefits Risk Assessment Health Impact Screening and Mapping Tool, more commonly known as COBRA. And this is a tool developed by the EPA, and it was previously used in the 2030 GGRA plan. And it's actually an existing effort at the EPA to harmonize GCAM, which is our model, with COBRA. And so we're able to build on their existing methodology for the specific modeling we're doing here. And COBRA models the emission and dispersal of particulate matter, so PM 2.5, sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxides, ammonia, and volatile organic compounds, VOCs. And it translates all of those emissions into health effects at the state level with the potential for county level data. We're not sure if we'll have county level resolution for the June report. That may follow with the final report later. So an example of what output from this model might look like is like policy scenario X leads to 1,000 fewer deaths and $1 million saved from work loss days due to air pollution compared to policy scenario Y. So it's a comparative model from a baseline. Next slide. On the economic impact side, we're partnering with the RESI, Regional Economic Studies Institute at Towson University, and we're modeling economic impacts with REMI PI+. And again, this is the same team that previously provided economic impact analysis for the 2030 GGRA plan. So we're very happy to have them back on the team, already very familiar with the Maryland context and able to jump in quickly. And we're currently working with them to harmonize our GCAM outputs with the REMI inputs, but expected output is similar to what we had in the GGRA plan. So there's job growth broken out by region, gross state product growth, and then personal income growth with some distributional impacts. And again, the most granular output from this may be in the later plan rather than June, but we'll certainly try for as much as we can get for the June report. And with that, happy to stop and take any questions. I do also have my colleague Steve Smith here if there are any modeling specific questions.
Thanks, Kathleen. Any questions for Kathleen or her team? Yeah, Garrett, go ahead.
Thanks, Mark. I guess this is really more of a comment for both Kathleen and for the previous speakers, for Tom, that within the future programming work group of the Empower Maryland proceeding that the Public Service Commission's been running, there's been a lot of analytical study over the last few months trying to understand the energy efficiency and electrification potential across Maryland's building stock as we try to understand, how big could we go with the statewide energy efficiency programs, including could we expand into also encouraging electrification across the building stock? How far could that get us toward our climate goals, and what would that look like? And they've been looking at some technical data. So a firm named AEG was hired to perform some initial analysis. Some additional subsequent analysis has been done by other parties that's really usefully layered into that. But it would be really useful. So I just want to make sure you all are aware of it. I don't know how much of the kind of the detail behind AEG's modeling we could get our hands on, and and vice versa. But I think a lot of useful ground has been covered there, and it would be fantastic if the analysis that you all end up doing here, as we're trying to understand is for the building sector specifically, how far could we go? What could it cost? What's feasible, et cetera. It'd be very useful to me as a participant of that other process to have some additional output here that might help us be more confident in comparing, is the modeling that was kind of done largely in a black box over here, did it come up with reasonable findings, I suppose, for what's potential in Maryland? And I think vice versa, there's probably a lot of really useful material from what they've been doing that might help us ideally get even further, so that we can go from the 30,000 foot modeling and really ideally there's bandwidth within these kinds of modeling exercises to really be thoughtful about the practical realities of how hard it is to implement some of these things and what all will really be necessary to be able to kind of get to some of the performance outcomes that we think we could get to. So just an offer that if you're not connected into that work that AEG's been doing, or if other folks on the call end up also doing other kinds of modeling like this, I think there's a bunch of us that are kind of crossing over these various studies and would love to help connect folks in. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. So Mark has shared the AEG report with us, and we are looking at that as part of our efforts.
Hi, this is Tom. So I would say, just as a general matter, one of the things that we're focused on is the identification of best available data. And we know that there are different choices. And so that would be an example of something that we would, also be very well interested in. I'm not sure whether David and Holly already have that or not, but I would just say for all of the measures in all of the sectors, if there are studies that you think are particularly important for us to have so that they can be considered as a part of the modeling effort for best available data, assumptions, et cetera, you can send them to me. I'll get them onto the team. We'd be happy to follow up with you about these, but this would be the time to share that kind of information. And our system is set up to do exactly that. It's set up to be able to receive and incorporate information from best available sources.
I'll follow up with both of you just to help as useful.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Okay, so we have 15 minutes left, and that actually magically puts us right on track. So thank you for all of our guest presenters today. Thanks, Kathleen, for that update from UMD. I'm going to turn it to our co-chair, Kim Coble, for a little bit of an update on what's happening in Annapolis these days, Kim.
Yeah, it sounds like a talk show, doesn't it? Lots is happening in Annapolis. Just to give a set, and I know many of you are doing work there too, so I don't mean, anyway, I'm sure everybody could give this update. The bills are starting to move, so the pace of things is really accelerating this last week and going into the next 3 weeks. So as I provide updates, it could have changed within the last hour or two. It could have changed recently. So, but interestingly, there are bills that are dealing with, and I'm trying to keep it focused on what's germane to this committee, but there's bills that are dealing with buildings. There's bills on solar. There's bills on wind. There's bills on storage and on specific programs such as Empower. So there's a lot happening in this realm that every year there seems to be more and more climate related bills. It's hard to keep it all in, keep it organized. Just a couple highlights. There is a bill, the Clean Trucks rule, which is similar to the Clean Cars that just has Mark or Chris mentioned. There was a press event on Monday announcing that. So there is one relative to the Truck Association. There's both a House and a Senate bill. It has passed the Senate 33-11, and it's over in the House. There was an amendment that was added that is still being discussed, but that bill is moving through. The offshore wind bill is a big bill, and it really is looking at 3 aspects of offshore wind to help promote that industry in Maryland. One is setting a goal, 8.5 million gigawatts by 2035, I believe it is. And there's some discussion about whether that's the right number or not. There's aspects of the bill that deals with the transmission. So how do we get the energy from offshore, onshore, and through the system? And then there's the third part, which is the procurement of it. And the bill takes steps in moving those issues forward. There's been hearings in both the House. Well, there's hearings in the House and Senate. The Senate actually discussed the bill today on the floor, and it's on 3rd reader. So it should be coming over to the House soon. So that bill looks like it's at least has some momentum on it. Excuse me, 8.5 by 2031. Then there's a community solar bill. The community solar program has been a pilot program, and that's due to expire next year. So this is to put that program, make it a permanent program, incentivizing community-based solar. And it was heard in the House and the Senate, and it came out of the Economic Matters Committee today. So that one's moving. There's an energy storage bill, both a House and Senate version of that. And hearings have been in on both sides, but it was, and this bill requires the PSC to establish an energy storage program and set targets for that, which could be a good one. And being heard in subcommittee in the House side tomorrow. There's several bills in on Empower, and two are, there's a House and Senate bill and then another House and Senate bill that are both with the intent of building flexibility in the Empower program, basing it on greenhouse gas reduction emissions. And the differences in the bill is how that flexibility is achieved. So there's a lot of debate going on and work on trying to bring these two together. So that's, and I've got bill numbers on all of this. If you want, you can just email me and I can help you find those. I think that is all the ones I was going to highlight. There's a, on the buildings, there's a bill on building performance standards that has been heard in the House. It's only on the House side of the bill. And this one requires Department of Labor to adopt, as part of its building performance standards, a requirement that new buildings meet all energy demands without using fossil fuels, and that all electric ready standards for new buildings are put in place. So, if you ever feel like you're not making a difference, just look at the actions in the General Assembly, because a lot of the recommendations we put forward are being acted on. I think that'll do it, Mark.
Thanks, Kim. And what Kim didn't mention is that you shouldn't email her for all of those bill numbers, because she has a website for that. So and other organizations as well, doing some great work tracking all these movements in Annapolis. Thanks for that update, Kim. Yeah, the building performance standards, not to be confused with the building energy performance standards, two different programs with similar names in the state. All right, well, we are in the last 10 minutes, and as usual, we dedicate this time for public comments. So if there's anyone on the line, be it an MWG member or a member of the public who'd like to offer any comments here at the end to contribute to today's discussions, the floor is open. Yeah, Josh Tolkien.
Hi, everybody. Great presentations today. I'm really excited to hear the presentations and the questions. I may have mentioned this in a previous meeting, but there was a coalition that worked together to support the passage of the Climate Solutions Now Act called Climate Partners. It was just a collaborative space for mostly advocacy groups to come together. That group has reformed as a collaborative focused on implementation of Climate Solutions Now. The comments to the commission last November were really the first manifestation of that collaborative work. We had a great meeting with Kathy. We are working with Tom Peterson as well. And we're going to be putting out a sort of a public solicitation from nonprofits and advocacy groups to begin to crowdsource the sort of ambitious proposals that we're going to want to help bring to MDE and the commission as part of the development of this plan. So in the spirit of Garrett's comments, I wanted to give folks the heads up on that. If you're interested in either, we're not trying to step on MDE or the commission's feet, but we're going to be working really hard to make sure that advocacy and climate advocacy groups sort of pool our ideas for the most efficient transmission to the commission, so that we can spend more time debating the ideas than trying to sort through 60 or 70 different advocacy suggestions. So if anybody is interested in learning more about that work, let me know. We're starting with a survey that will probably be circulating in the next couple of weeks, just asking people to submit and share ideas, and we'll be doing a little bit of additional outreach, and I'm very excited to be able to ultimately share, both the product of that work and some of our learnings back with the commission and with the department.
If I could just comment, Josh, if you could consider making, when you have that, making a presentation to the Mitigation Working Group, since obviously we'll be working in parallel with you.
Yes, and my goal is to be working both in parallel and to have the least duplication. So, you know, as soon as we know our timeline, we'll be very careful with our communication. We don't want to misrepresent that commenting to us is commenting to the commission, and just making sure that all of that communication out there is clear. Thus far, it's been really effective, because a lot of these groups sort of need extra lead time or need some additional orienting that we're able to provide.
Yeah, that's fine. I'm just looking for opportunities for us to incorporate any good ideas that you have into what we come out with as a product.
Yes, let me just say I'm 100% certain, Mike, that when we have some recommendations, you will definitely hear about them, and we'll ask for some time with the commission. Thank you.
Sounds good.
That's never been one of our shortcomings.
Thanks, Josh. Yeah, and you know, building on those comments, you know, what we're really trying to do, I think, through this year's MWG meetings is to create some space to dive into some of these, you know, policies that we're chewing on at MDE and continue to chew on at the commission, about the new policies that are needed for achieving Maryland's goals. We are, as I think CCS hinted at today, and CGS hinted at perhaps last month, building as a starting place, looking at a lot of the Climate Commission's recommendations over the last few years. The Climate Commission has, of course, made a number of excellent recommendations, you know, for accelerating Maryland's GHG reductions. So that's part of our starting place. But we are receiving additional ideas from stakeholders around the state. We welcome anyone to reach out to MDE at any time to share ideas. We do hope to be able to present in the June Pathways report some conceptual policies that we think would be important for helping Maryland achieve its GHG reduction goals, and then spending much of the rest of summer doing stakeholder engagement sessions, listening sessions to get input on those conceptual policies. So lots of work together ahead. Any other comments from members of the public or MWG members as we head toward 3 o'clock here? Yes. Is it Pam, or is it Rachel standing in for Pam?
Hi, yes, it's Rachel. Delegate, like it was said earlier, things are really speeding up here in the General Assembly. So Delegate Queen has been pulled in 10 different directions today. So I stepped in for her. But I just wanted to say thank you for holding this and giving us this information. And you have a friend here in Annapolis if anybody needs anything. So thank you, guys.
It's good to have friends in Annapolis. Thanks for joining us today, Rachel. Okay, any last comments before we wrap today? All right, well then, it was another fun one, folks. To wrap, enjoy the end of session, enjoy the start of spring. We will be back together in April.
Thanks.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.